everybody. Welcome to another episode of UX Pathways. And I have the honor to be joined by Ben Woods. Ben, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Mark?
Good. Glad to catch up with you. I know we've been working to schedule this interview, and I think it's important to hear your perspective. You've got a really, um, I would say, robust background. And I would love for you just to explain what your current role is and just explain how did you get into this field of user experience?
Sure. So my current role is I actually run my own independent design consultancy called Covalent Studio out of Akron, Ohio. And really what I do is work with clients and companies, large and small, really to help them to understand their users, understand their customers. And so we do a lot of research on new products, ideas for products. And then we do design work. So that includes everything from wireframing, information architecture, prototyping, et cetera, up to and including software development. So I have teams that I work with to actually produce and deliver those software products. And that's what we do. The other side of that is a lot of what I'm doing right now is a lot of digital transformation. There's a lot of there's a lot of established firms who really have been a little bit slow to embrace digitalization and e-commerce and those sorts of things. And really what we've seen over the last 2 years or so with the pandemic is there's been a big push for those companies who previously may have been reliant on brick and mortar sales. They may have been reliant on events for training. That's all shifting. And they're really, for me, I would say it's been obvious for a long time that an online strategy is vital to any business. The last 2 years have now shown that it's extremely vital to your business. And so that's another growing area of work for us.
Yeah, it sounds like that digital transformation, the whole atmosphere that occurred over the last couple of years have really pushed that forward. And I think that's why this whole user experience, there's a lot of different ways to define that. It seems as though the digital transformation has been pushing that agenda forward just because it's part of the mix. And I know we've both been in this field for a while, but could you just give a little background of how you got into
Sure.
this industry?
Yeah. So it's funny. I mean, I've been in the digital realm for more than 20 years. So that puts me at graduating from the high school around the mid 90s, we'll say. But the funny thing is I've always been really very interested in technology. I've always been really interested in art. And I would say that when I was in high school, I was really trying to make the decision between going into engineering or going into art. And of course, what kind of art could I go into where I would be able to make a good living? And so, fortunately, I was, I had a really great art teacher when I was in high school who really kind of opened my eyes to going into graphic design. And so I went into graphic design. I realized that's a profession, and so you can actually do well with that. And it was a really great time for me to go into undergraduate studies in graphic design because that's right when the web was taking off. And when I first encountered web design and took my first courses in web design, I said, this is for me because this is a great merger of technology and art and design, two things, the things I really enjoyed a lot. And so that's how I started getting into digital. I would say that my eyes were really kind of open to UX and usability, probably by Keith Instone, as well as the first meeting of the Usability Professionals Association at Progressive in Cleveland. So that's when I really kind of started to get exposed to this idea of UX and usability. And it really kind of dovetailed with a lot of my interests as a designer, as a graphic designer and a web designer, which was, I was not interested just in making pretty websites. I was interested in making websites that actually help people accomplish their goals. But I didn't know that was a actual profession or a thing that we could do until I ran into people like Keith and folks at UPA. And that's really kind of how it went, was probably around 2004, 2005 is when I really realized, hey, this is actually a field of study that I could go into. And the funny thing is I come from UX from a graphic design perspective. Certainly, I think people at that time came from various different backgrounds. Like, in fact, I know they did, because there wasn't really much of a course of study for people to go into UX back then. And uh, so around 2005, I switched jobs. I went back to Kent State University. I got a Master's of Science in UX. Um, and that really kind of kicked off everything from since then. So got that degree, started working in UX, built a usability lab for a company that I worked for at the time, trained up a team in India to help us build the company's website. Went back to school again and got a master's of an MBA because I was really interested in how design and UX made contributions to businesses. And so that's really kind of takes me to where I am now. So that's how I got into UX. And I'd say that's kind of how I have gotten to where I am today, for the most part.
I'm glad you mentioned all those references, because for all those listening and viewing, I think it's important to understand how you can get into this field is by going to events, listening to others that have been in the field for a while, and then going back and shifting gears when it comes to your career. And I love the fact that you went back for the MBA, because the reality is we're all in this field so we can help our organizations turn a profit. So it's an important part. But I think a lot of us think, oh, it's art, we're going to be an artist. But the reality is we're helping move things forward. And that leads to one of the questions that's been out here is, so right now you've talked about that user experience is really a growing field. Why do you think it is so sought after at this point?
Oh, wow. There are so many answers to that. Um, I would say here's the thing, and really kind of just calling back to my experience. I think it's funny
Mhm.
that, you know, we in our educational system, we expect, kids who are 17 to figure out what they're going to do for the rest of their careers. I mean, that's bizarre, right? I mean, you could not, no bank would give a 17-year-old a loan to buy a BMW. But for some reason, we expect 17-year-olds to be able to figure out what they're going to do for the next 20, 30, 40 years of their lives, and we'll sign them up for student loans. So that's kind of crazy. But why is it a sought after career? I think the big reason is it's something that is very visible and accessible to people, at least superficially. I think that people can understand the visual aspects of design. And so they kind of say, oh, that's an ugly website, or that's an ugly interface. The truth is, though, that is not what UX is. I think it's just the most accessible part of UX. The truth is, and I know you and I have talked about this, UX is really more about what is in the user's mind, what their motivations are, how they achieve tasks, that sort of thing. I think it's become sought after because companies have realized that design and UX are key differentiators and key competitive weapons for them. I've talked about this. It's been a while since I've given this talk, but there's a limited number of ways that firms can compete with each other, right? And they're all kind of peaking. Okay, firms can compete on price, but nobody likes to compete on price, right? Because that's just a dirt path to tighter and lower margins. And so no company really wants to compete on price. They can compete on brand and marketing and advertising, that sort of thing. So, yeah, you could do like a Super Bowl commercial. You could do an expensive advertising campaign. The key word there is it's expensive. Also, a lot of advertising is questionable as to how effective it is. And by the way, advertising is a very fickle thing, right? So you might be, advertising and brand reputation are very fickle. You might be a company with a reputation and with a big advertising budget, but the second something happens in terms of quality or reputation, all of that money has been wasted. And a good example of that I would point out is Volkswagen, right? Several years ago, Volkswagen represented solid quality German engineering, right? Fahrvergnügen and the joy of driving and all that, right? And so Volkswagen at the time had a reputation for quality and integrity. And then you'll remember there was the diesel scandal with Volkswagen, right? Where they were basically juicing and adjusting their software in their cars to fake emissions tests. Yeah, so it's a few years back, but the point is, all of the money that Volkswagen spent trying to build that reputation was basically squandered because of some bad actors in their engineering department. And so, advertising is a way to compete. Price is another way of competing. You could compete on operationally and efficiency. So, you might have some kind of advantage where you're able to produce a product cheaper or acquire a good cheaper than your competitors and compete that way. But really the point is, all of these ways of competing are either temporary or they are peaking. You cannot lower the price so much that you're paying consumers to buy your product, because that makes no economic sense. Design and understanding what your customers want and designing for that, and making their lives easy and reducing friction reduces costs, by the way, so it helps all the other ways that you're going to compete, and it's sustainable, and it's really ultimately the best way and the most cost efficient way to differentiate yourself. I always say we don't do usability or UX or even accessibility because we're nice and because we're humanitarians. We might be, but ultimately what we're really interested in is, does this help our organization achieve its goals? And so I think that's why companies have really embraced UX. Now, the dark side to why I think UX has become sought after is because I am concerned that a lot of people think it's easy and it's lucrative. And I think that is influenced by a lot of what I see in social media and influencer cultures, right? So, I kind of joke about this with other people. First of all, UX is not easy. It can be lucrative. You can get good salaries, but I see a lot of things like in Instagram or in YouTube, and talking about a day in the life of a UX designer. And I watch these 6-minute videos, and I'm not going to name any names, but I watch these 6 or 7-minute videos of somebody talking about and describing and documenting their life as a UX designer. And it usually starts off with them doing their hair or picking out their outfit, and then maybe maybe talking about what they're going to do in the day. And you might see about 5 seconds of wireframing happening, or maybe they're talking to a customer, but then you'll see like 2 minutes of pan shots of food, of scenery, what club they went to that night. If you are influenced and attracted to UX because there's somebody putting out nice influencer content, that's not really a good reason to get in UX. It's also, by the way, a horrible way to learn about UX, because you cannot build a career on Instagram stories and YouTube videos. So I think that's the dark side of why people are attracted to UX, is because there are too many people who have a superficial understanding of UX.
Mhm.
They go on to become influencers or want to be influencers, and they convey this idea that UX is easy. It's not. It's also mentally challenging and mentally taxing. You can do you can do the work, you can do the research, and you can try to educate your organization. And it may take a lot of time to educate your organization on the methods that you've used to get the information that they need. You might have to do it a few times with the same people. And then you run into things, the actual internal inertia, the internal resistance to UX, right? And again, this is why having soft skills is so important to UX. So, again, getting back to this idea of, Instagram shorts and YouTube videos and influencers, it's not, they'll show you wireframes, but a lot of UX is not just about wireframes. It's not just about talking to customers. It's also about understanding your organization and understanding how to steer your organization through influence. And that's the kind of influence that matters, is leading through influence in an organization. And it can be challenging. It can be very challenging. And, sometimes at the end of the day, you've done great research, you've done great design work, and the business doesn't want to do it for whatever reason. I'll give you a perfect example. So I was working for a large firm. I'm not going to name the name. And we had done the research, and we knew exactly what we needed to do to improve the usability and customer satisfaction with our homepage. Now, this is a global home website. And we said, well, we know why our users are coming to our website. They're coming to our website because they want to buy products and services. Well, that's great, because that's what we want to sell to them, our products and services. So, we have a two-sided market. This should work. And so we actually designed, we had the research, we designed an updated version of this homepage, which really kind of made products and services and the findability of products and services front and center, right? Enter a part number, enter a part of a part number, enter a brand name, what have you. It would have been a minimal effort to make this change. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the chief marketing officer at the time was resistant to it. Why were they resistant to it? Not because they disagreed with the research, and not that they disagreed that it would improve things. They did not want to implement it, and they did not want to make any improvement to that website. They wanted it to get actually as bad as possible because, this is where it's going to sound crazy, for some reason, they were in love with another content management system. And they wanted that other content management system. And they were going to use these negative customer satisfaction numbers to justify the purchase of another content management system, which the content management system doesn't matter at all. Not really. I mean, if you're talking about making changes, you can make changes in almost any content management system that's out there. But so it became this internal political argument instead of actually,
Wow.
focusing on what would improve business and improve things for our customers. And by the way, I mean, it's just stupefying. Like, why would you, it's kind of like, I would say to this person, you're leaving money on the table, right? You know that there are people with cash in hand who want to buy products, and you're saying, no, we're going to make it as hard as possible for them. It's almost like, this isn't a game, right?
It does sound like a game, though. It
You know
sounds
we're
like
we're in
it's
business to make money, right?
it sounds like a sports team where you decide to tank
Yeah,
so you can get the number one draft pick or something. It's just what it
exactly,
reminds me of.
exactly.
Well, I want to be respectful. I know we have a few moments left, and I appreciate you talking about the dark side and then the positives and then giving a really clear example. But the one thing that keeps coming up is there's a lot of individuals that now are listening wondering, okay, so I'm thinking about going into user experience, and it sounds like, okay, so it sounds like it's going to be a little challenging. I need to kind of be clear on why I'm getting into this. But where do you think it's going to go when someone's thinking about going into this field? Is there some kind of future that you can see this going towards?
Yeah, I think there is a future that we're going towards, and I think that it's been actually really very interesting to see how the UX profession has changed in the roughly 20 years that I've been in it. Early on, UX teams of one were extremely common, and that's where you had a generalist who eventually became a senior level generalist, doing everything from research to design to selling internally. And now we're seeing more specialization, obviously. So I think we're going to continue to see a certain degree of specialization. I actually do think that there, and again, I don't want to take up too much time because this isn't a business lecture, but I do think that as we look towards the future, and it's just because I've seen this with other markets, I think that what will ultimately happen is we are going to see some low-level specializations. We're going to see those salaries go down. We're going to see the required credentials for those go down. I think that those will ultimately be offshored to low-cost providers, low-cost countries, and potentially automated. Now that ultimately, I think, leads to an overall contraction of jobs available in UX. But what will be left, I believe, is probably going to be okay for people who are at the higher end of salaries, at the higher end of seniority levels. So, so for example, I see a future where we're going to have more senior level consultants doing more selling of UX and strategy for companies in UX, and the task oriented work like mock-ups, automating mock-ups, putting together remote testing. I think a lot of that is going to end up being offshored or outsourced or automated. And so I see, and again, you look at a lot of industries, that's ultimately what ends up happening is any industry, whether it's accounting, coal mining, I mean, we're seeing it in fast food, for crying out loud. I mean, that is ultimately what will end up happening. Now, is it going to happen in 2 years? No. Is it going to happen in 10 or 20 or 30 years? Probably. And that's just the way the markets work.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, it's definitely been seeing that trend, and some really good advice for those that are thinking of getting into user experience. And I think you really laid it out clear that the field is growing, but thinking about that specialization, thinking about the strategy, and it just isn't, this flowery atmosphere. There actually is there's some rigor there that needs to be deployed.
I think right now we are living in a time in UX where there is very little rigor. And so it's very easy for people to get into entry level jobs. Now, I know somebody's going to hear this and they're going to say, Ben, you're full of it. It's hard to get an entry level job. And they're right. I mean, it's never easy to get entry level jobs. But the point is, I guess the point I'm making is there are more jobs than people right now. And so in that respect, there are opportunities to get in. Now, whether those entry level job descriptions are good job descriptions, whether they say things like it's an entry level job, but you have to have 3 years of experience, that's not a good entry level job description, by the way. That's another matter. But the point is, there are more jobs than people right now, but that will end up changing.
I appreciate you being on the podcast, and love to have you back and talk
Sure.
more specifically about some of these little minute things I think we jumped into on today's podcast. And how can people find more about yourself?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm sure you can put a link in the description. If you
Sure.
just look for D. Ben Woods, you can also go to dbenwoods.com. That's my personal site. And you can also find me at workwithcovalent.com.
All right, make sure, check that out. And Ben, thanks again for being on the podcast.
Great. Thanks, Mark.